Alright, welcome to another quick tip tutorial. Now this time using pre-made tileable textures or the noise plugin in Zbrush. Now before we get started, you do need to have an unwrapped mesh, and if you don't know how to do that, you can check out my previous video covering how to do that. Alright, onto the actual video. Alright, so here I have a shoe and I want to apply these patterns onto the tongue just like I did with the other parts. So first up, I'll make sure to divide the mesh with Ctrl D so it has a high enough poly count to use the alphas. In this case I have 7 million, which is probably more than double what I need, but that's okay. Next, I'll create a new layer just so I have more freedom to work, and after that I'll go to the surface menu, click on noise, and then choose edit to get this menu to pop up. In this menu I want to make sure that UV is selected so that the noise is using the UVs, and also let's make sure that mix basic noise and color blend are set to 0. This will make sure that the noise isn't applied along with the alphas. Now after that you can select noise plugin and edit to get this menu, and this is where the magic happens. Okay, as you can see there are a ton of options, but the one I want to make sure is checked is the interactive update so we can actually see the results of what we are doing while we are using this. After that you can play with the options here, but I'll choose the grid option, and as you can see there's quite a few options here, but I'll change the settings which are pretty self-explanatory and I'll just kind of change them to my liking. I'll change the grid width so it's a bit thicker. I'll also change the Z rotation in this case because it makes sense, and I'll click on OK. You can change the scale here as well if you want. I'll then click on mask by noise instead of apply, and then I'll inflate or deflate the geometry based on what I want. And because I have layers, I can further adjust this to my liking. And yeah, that's about it. So if you want to learn more cool tips and tricks, I'm going to go through those right now. Alright, so tip number 1, if you want to create a quick temporary pattern, you can use the offset to poke holes into the geometry like this. You can then invert the pattern by flipping the tile and mortar color values. Again, this isn't real geometry, but you could still render it in Zbrush as if it were real. Tip number 2, you can also use your custom alphas in Zbrush by clicking on alpha on or off to import and use them. Tip number 3, you can mask off certain areas or control click like I'm doing here to mask off specific pieces of geometry so that the alphas aren't applied to these areas. Tip number 4, with most noise patterns you can use the curves over here to customize and control the noise variation and type. You can add more points by just clicking, or you can minus them by dragging them into the canvas. If you drag these points into the canvas and bring them back, it will harden or soften the curve. This applies to all curve graphs like this, by the way, and it's super useful to know about. Tip number 5, the noise isn't actually real until you apply it to the mesh using apply to mesh. Also note that the lower resolution your geometry is, the worse the noise will look. Tip number 6, you can use the 3D option here instead of using the UV option on meshes that don't have UVs to project the alphas onto the mesh. This can be helpful and super quick when you need it. But remember, it's not going to wrap around the entire object because it's a projection and it's not using UVs. Tip number 7, max on noise is also another awesome option to use. You can use the noise plug scale over here to mess with the scale and strength. Tip number 8, whenever I use layers, I like to use the morph brush. This brush can be used by storing the morph target over here, and whatever you do to the geometry after this, you can then restore it back to the morph target points when you use the brush over this area. And yeah, that's about it for this one. Pretty quick tutorial, quite a few tips and tricks, and yeah, that's about it. Like I said, so like it if you liked it, dislike it if you didn't. Let me know what you guys thought in the comments section. Check out my Discord, my website, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.